Buddy, I apologize for the delay. We had a little technical glitch that we have overcome, and we are ready to proceed. And I thank you all for your patience, and I thank you for your attendance. Honorable members of the City Council, on March 12, 2020, Governor Northam declared a state of emergency due to the COVID-19. Because of the catastrophic nature of the declared emergency, it is impractical and unsafe to assemble a quorum of the City Council in a single location. In accordance with the Virginia Beach City Code, Section 2-21, and Virginia Code 2.2, 3708-2A3, and by the special authority vested in me as mayor of the City of Virginia Beach, I hereby call for a special meeting by electronic communication means of the Virginia Beach City Council on Tuesday, April 7th, 3 p.m. In accordance with Virginia Code 2.2, 3708-2A3, this special meeting by electronic communication means will be held virtually with City Council members participating via video audio conference. The purpose of this special meeting is for the City Council discussions of the following: tax deferrals, suspension of the meals tax, reduction of personal property tax, areas for expenditure reductions, and provide guidance to staff for preparation of any necessary resolutions or ordinances of Council's consideration at a subsequent City Council special session. Following the discussion, the Council may consider the adoption of an item to address tax relief necessitated by the COVID-19 pandemic in the form of ordinance to suspend provisions of a city code regarding penalties and interest upon certain local taxes during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is sponsored by Councilman Moss. And the special meeting will be broadcast on cable at www.vbgov.com and Facebook Live. Citizens are encouraged to submit their comments to City Council prior to the special meeting via email at citycouncil@vbgov.com. Sincerely, Bobby Dyer. Okay, at this point, Ms. Barnes, can you go over some of the structure and instructions for this meeting going forward?
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of City Council. This is the City Clerk, Amanda Barnes. Today's meeting is being conducted electronically and is allowed based on the Governor's State of Emergency Declaration for COVID-19. Also, please note, this meeting is being recorded and City Council will consider only essential business items. To ensure this live electronic event is successful, please note the following meeting instructions must be followed. Council discussion. It is important that council members hold their comments until recognized. The city clerk will recognize the city council members in the order in which they raise their virtual hand. It is important that each council member lower their virtual hand at the conclusion of their comments and re-raise to make any additional comments. At the conclusion of council discussion, the mayor will move to ordinances and begin with the first item listed on the published agenda. The mayor will ask for a motion and a second, then open the floor for discussion among the council members. The city clerk will again recognize the city council members in the order which they raise their virtual hand. Once discussion is over and the vote is called, the clerk will proceed with a roll call vote of the city council members. Once the vote is recorded and stated for the record, the mayor will move to the next item. All votes will be by roll call and recorded in the minutes. Mayor and members of council, are there any questions about the process? Seeing no one raise their hand, Mayor, I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Okay, we do have the roll call, and all our, all council members are present. Miss,
So we need to do a roll call vote.
a roll call?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, please.
okay.
Councilmember Abbott,
Aye.
Councilmember Berlucci,
Present.
Councilmember Henley,
Present.
Councilmember Jones,
Present.
Councilmember Moss,
Present.
Councilmember Tower,
Present.
Councilmember Rouse,
Present.
Councilmember Wilson,
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood,
Present.
Mayor Dyer,
Present.
all are present.
Okay, at this point, we're going to request the city manager, Mr. Leahy. He has a couple of presentations that are necessary that may be very germane to the meeting going forward.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. First up, I'd like to have ask Dr. Demetria Lindsay, the Director of the Virginia Beach Health Department, to give us a 2 or 3 minute update on where the health department is with the COVID-19 emergency.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. We have 3,333 cases reported in Virginia and 563 hospitalizations and 63 deaths. In Virginia Beach, as of 4/6, there are 200 cases officially reported on the VDH website. 11 additional cases have now also been identified for a total of 211 cases. Our cumulative number cleared from isolation is 23 at this time. We've also had 4 deaths. DCLS testing turnaround within the past 24 hours shows 0 requests or approvals. In the last 7 days, 18 requests and 14 approvals. Now, to look at the positive cases a little closer, the average age is 51 in Virginia Beach. As of this month, 53% have been female and 47% have been male. We've seen that shift, but roughly on occasion, slightly more males and females, but roughly close to 50%. We have had 12% of cases identified as positive, that have been hospitalized. We have, regarding race and ethnicity breakdown, 63% of cases are unknown or missing that information. However, when we look at the positive cases where we do have identification of race and ethnicity, 56% are white, 31% African American, and 9% Asian, a little bit over 1% other. We are seeing a significant number, roughly 40% of cases in which the infection appears to have been community acquired. That meaning that in those cases in our case investigation, we have not been able to identify a direct source of the infection in those individuals. These cases have been identified, or positive cases have been identified throughout the community of Virginia Beach. They've not been localized to any particular area. And with the exception of one previous situation, there have been no clusters. It is safe to say at this point that we do have widespread community transmission. We've also started to see cases in congregate settings. This is particularly concerning due to the fact that many of these settings involve vulnerable populations who are at high risk for complications, and due to the challenges in controlling transmission among in these settings. Because of the large number of cases that we are beginning to investigate, and this involves considerable time and effort to really investigate the underlying causes and connections for each individual case, we are experiencing a significant amount of time A number of our staff have been devoted 100% of their time to this effort, and we are also diverting other staff to help support this effort. We are at a point that we are looking at prioritization of cases in the event that we cannot pursue all cases. Our focus still at this point is to investigate all cases as fully as we can, but we may prioritize our monitoring activity. And that is currently for each case, we do an investigation to try to identify the source of the infection and potential contacts, and we monitor cases and contacts and also advise them on how they should report if they should develop symptoms. So for low-risk cases, in the event that we cannot follow everyone, we would prioritize those that we would monitor. In this effort, we do need everyone's help to stop the spread. We are at a point where we assume that there is the potential for community-level transmission in any part of the city. Virginia Department of Health urges all Virginians to stay home and practice social distancing if they're able to stay home. If you have to go out for critical things like grocery shopping or medical care, stay at least 6 feet away from others. Older adults and people of any age who have serious underlying medical conditions may be at higher risk for more severe complications from COVID-19. Stay home and avoid close contact with people who are sick. The most common symptoms for COVID-19 have been fever, cough, and shortness of breath. Other common symptoms include fatigue, decreased appetite, muscle aches, and headaches. And also possibly nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Not every person who has been exposed to COVID-19 needs to be tested. Due to our limitations in testing supplies in the state and across the nation, it has been important to prioritize those who are tested to individuals who are high risk, including those who are hospitalized. A positive test would not change, in most cases, what the doctor or the hospital advises an individual to do to take care of themselves and to keep others safe. Testing should be used, again, for people who need to be hospitalized for severe illness, for healthcare workers and first responders, and people who live or work in congregate settings where outbreaks could occur. If you have COVID-19 symptoms but are not tested, assume you have the infection and stay home. There's growing evidence that people can spread COVID-19 even if they never develop symptoms or before their symptoms start. Even though this is possible, CDC believes that people are most contagious when they have symptoms. CDC has issued new recommendations as of the end of last week, and that is for the use of cloth face coverings in community settings to help reduce the spread of COVID-19. This is particularly important in our community where we know at this point we do have community-level transmission. CDC recommends wearing cloth face coverings in settings where other social distancing measures are difficult to maintain, such as grocery stores and pharmacies, while continuing to take other actions that help prevent the spread of COVID-19. It's important to remember that the major benefit of wearing these cloth coverings is to catch, if the individual may be infected, the wearer, it would catch any secretions that may be emitted when that individual speaks or coughs or sneezes. So the wearer is actually protecting others around them. But if we have large numbers of our population who must be in the public wearing the face coverings, then we have the opportunity to reduce the opportunity for transmission between people in the public. We would strongly encourage people, again, to stay home, could observe this measure when you have to be out. That's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lindsay. Mayor and members of council, now would like to ask Aaron Sutton, our Director of the Office of Emergency Management, to say a couple words about where we are with respect to the organizational response.
Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you. Mayor and council members, I will be brief today. Dr. Lindsay really summed up the current situation that we have with COVID-19 and a couple key things that I want to touch on today. A lot of discussion about PPE, personal protective equipment. The city has streamlined the purchasing process in standing up an official procurement unit, working with our finance purchasing office and subject matter experts. This is important as the market has become saturated and we need to centralize the purchasing of PPE throughout our city. The Commonwealth, we had a conference call with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management today, is expected to receive some of the orders in the next week or so and allocate them throughout the localities. The Commonwealth is still emphasizing that localities should order as much as they can through their local vendors, which is what the city is doing. We still have our requests at the state, but we are ordering locally when we can find it. And occupational health is providing guidance as we look through conservation of PPE and also helping us sort through vendors that may not be as above the board as we need them to be. A key transition that we are doing with our city response operations. The last few weeks we have pulled together work groups and worked through issues. This week we are transitioning into a formal incident command structure and assigning roles for directors and division supervisors throughout the city to help as we move into a longer term operation. Part of this is so that we have enough backup as we look at this disease progressing and making sure that we have the depth to support and maintain our response operations and as we work through recovery operations. The city continues to shift staff around. Departments have been wonderful in helping to support emergency management and some of the other departments that are in need of personnel. The special events work group has canceled or rescheduled events scheduled through June 10th. Schools have been providing meals for school-age children and are assisting with the child care feeding as well. They served 90,000 meals last week and are now providing meals on Fridays to cover weekends. Next week would have begun spring break for the schools, so the feeding operations will be modified. Pickup will be on Monday for days Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and pickup on Thursday will be Thursday through Sunday. So there will be a modification for what would have been spring break for us. The city began their child care operations for essential employees at Parks and Rec facilities yesterday, and schools are helping to support the feeding operations. Lincoln Elementary School and Lansdowne Elementary School are being prepared for child care facilities to help our partners, Centera healthcare workers, as a convenient location across from the hospitals. And we are working to get them operational by April 13th. With that, that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, Aaron. Mayor, members of council, now relative with respect to your agenda.
I'm sorry, Mr. Leahy, we have council members who would like to have discussion, have some questions.
By all means.
Sorry, thank you. Aaron Rouse.
Thank you. It's good to see you all again. First, thank you, Ms. Lindsay, for the update, as well as Ms. Sutton for the update. My question to Ms. Lindsay, are the cases or positive cases for COVID-19, has that increased in our city, or has it gone down or remained the same?
It appears that in this month, our cases have been about the same. We do have periods where we get a surge of cases reported. That seems to be more with the turnaround time in the lab. But basically, we've not seen a dramatic increase or decrease in cases.
All right, thank you.
Any other speakers? Any other speakers? Doesn't appear there's no other questions from council.
Okay, Mr. Leahy?
Okay, thank you, Mayor and members of council. Now, relative to your agenda, I would like to ask Alice Kelly to come forth and give a brief presentation on a cash flow analysis. I did provide that to you in the Friday transmittal, where we have modeled some significant revenue reductions because of this emergency and what that means in terms of our cash flow.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Mayor Dyer, Vice Mayor Woods, honorable council members. First and foremost, this is a healthcare crisis, but it has caused such a major economic crisis for both citizens, businesses, and as well as the city, and the city needs to react. The sudden impact has caused major liquidity issues throughout the country and as investors rush to cash and try to get cash. The finance and budget departments have been working diligently to review all the information that we can possibly obtain to determine the financial impacts for the COVID-19 pandemic. We have an excellent finance team, including the budget department, the finance department, as well as the city treasurer, commissioner of revenue, schools, finance staff, and we've all been working together to try to develop financing strategies. Also, we've been having numerous contacts with various experts, if you will, such as our city's financial advisors, our accounting firms. We've had webinars with many different financial advisors. GFOA, the Government Finance Office Association. VGFOA has weekly conference calls with finance directors in the state. And also, we are on a municipal CFO mail list with CFOs from around the country in the top most populous cities in the country. We've looked at ODU's economic data, and we've tried to evaluate the Financial Stimulus Act, and as well as literature from any kind of accounting firms. Yesterday at a webinar, we had an economist, actually, who said that this is the greatest unexpected economic shock the world has ever known. There's too many unknown unknowns. There's no prior historical basis to help model the situation, and there's no way to imagine the economic cost. His advice is that government leaders need to be pragmatic, wise, and nimble. And so with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the importance of cash. With all of those experts, with all of the conference calls, the one thing that everybody agrees on is that liquidity is point number one. So early on, we started looking at our cash, and we've been refining this more and more as we look at our cash levels and we find more information. We wanted to look at cash to make sure we have enough for essential service over not just the short term, but the long term, and for which now is unknown for circumstances that are for the circumstances that we may or may not know. GFOA has published a report, Cash is King. So we've been looking at everything, and we've tried to get the level of cash on hands to pay our essential services, such as payroll, debt service, and emergency expenses. And we want to make sure that we realize that's the most important financial indicator during this crisis. Our best practice for local government is to have 2 months of operating cash on hand during normal economic conditions. What we also want to point out, for long-term CIP, our cash is in the municipal bond market. For the last 3 weeks, it has been closed as investors cashed out investments and showed increasing focus on potential credit concerns. Today, however, there have been 3 large bond sales, and that gives us some hope that there might be some room for being able to go to the bond market. However, that is just 1 day out of 3 weeks. This is the first time ever that the municipal bond market has not sold bonds. Even during the crisis in 2008, AAA, AA rated credit could sell. So this is a whole different ballgame here. So if this trend continues, we have to make sure that we know that we may have difficulty in borrowing it for our CIP requirements. So we need to reduce expenditures and take judicious steps in the impact of revenue streams. Our cash flow analysis is we had to base on our current cash balance, and typically in any local government in the state of Virginia, March and October are the lowest months of your cash based on when real estate revenues come in. So we use the current cash balance, and then we use projected revenue collection and payments of expenditures. Cash is not also predicated on just budget, but also the cash inflow and outflow. So things come in regardless of the budget year. We also have encumbrances from prior years that we have to pay, as well as receipts of last fiscal year revenues. And so those have to be taken into account as we do our cash balances. We also, in certain funds, so the city has a lot of different segregated funds, that those funds may only be available for certain legally required and restricted purposes. Our self-insurance health care, our water and sewer fund, our stormwater fund, and then we have certain grants that are only available for that particular grant. We also, in this cash flow assumption, we assumed much lower collection rates. We assumed higher emergency expenditures, and then we also lowered non-essential service expenditures. One of the things that GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, said is, you could look on your impacts different than the general national impacts. However, if you have a small set of circumstances and you don't have certainty, you need to double your range of uncertainty when you look at this. So we really took a very conservative look of what our collection rates would be. The first chart I'm going to show you is a general fund and total cash balances. The green and the orange chart are actuals from last year. So the green is our total cash from last year, April through April. This is a little bit different than what was presented on Friday. We were able to do the whole a whole year, April through April, because, as I said, March and April is when the cash goes down. So we have the green as the total cash for the city, and then the dotted dark blue line is the total cash for the city projected for this year. The other line is orange, is our general fund, and our general fund projected cash flow. We use projected 21 budget, but FY 2020 payroll for this one. The next projected cash balance is more by type, and I'd like to talk about this one a little bit further. So as I said, there's different types of cash that we have and have to be used for certain types of expenditures. So we have the operating type funds, which are general fund in schools, special revenue, and our internal service funds. And so that is the blue line. And so we go from having about $200 million today down to less than $100 million in April of 21. We also took into account that we were going to be reducing expenditures and reducing revenues in this all our cash analysis. Also, we showed the capital projects for city and school. We assumed we weren't going to be able to borrow. Hopefully that's not the case, but for this assumption, we assumed we weren't going to be able to borrow any cash. And so we are using also an average expense of CIP. We need to refine this a little bit further to see exactly when bills are coming due, but that is a very challenging proposition to do on a month-to-month basis. We also looked at the water and sewer and the healthcare funds, which are also restricted, and to see how much their cash would be. Water fund is another one that we're uncertain if the crisis goes on, how much collection will be for that particular fund. The impacts of the COVID-19 and tax relief. So we have projected a proposed 3-month holiday for meals tax, and so that will be a loss of $26.5 million for May through July. And that has different funds that it goes to, obviously, as pointed out in this slide. So the general fund has $8.5 million of that loss, the schools 4.4, the tip and the tap fund have 11.4, open space 1.4, and the Sandbridge SSD is about 800,000. So if you add in the real estate and personal property tax deferral, penalty and interest elimination, the total loss in tax revenue, it's estimated to be about 64.5 for general fund in FY 2020. So that revenue reduction offset by $60 million in expenditure reductions, and off to balance, we'd have to take 3.7 from unassigned fund balance. This is actually shown better in the next chart, on the next graph. So we have our revenue projections, which typically we do a glide path, And if, as you could see, our glide path is to the end of the year, excuse me, that we have about 95% for expenditures and about 94% for revenues. And that's the difference is that we would have to use a little bit of fund balance. So we have already budgeted fund balance use of $67.1 million. If we have a revenue loss of 64.5, and we have the offset expenditure savings of 60.8, we would have to use the unassigned fund balance of 3.7. And one thing I did want to point out in this chart is October and May expenditures include 3 payroll periods, so the chart lines don't go down during those 2 months. One of the things that we did get a lot of advice from our financial advisors and all 4 bond rating agencies that COVID impacts on credit ratings is going by delaying or lowering PEEP, real estate and personal property tax. It would have an impact on our cash flow that could negatively impact credit rating. I think the timing of it in the city of Virginia Beach, we do have solid reserves, that the timing of a delay would not really impact the cash flow and what we need. However, it might impact the collection rate. Credit analysts want the city to preserve flexibility and liquidity. We do have leisure industry in our economy, and it makes us a little bit more vulnerable to economic downturns. And it's unknown the federal action, including the CARES Act, Stimulus Act, and some federal support for public businesses and public health. So we might have some, obviously, positive federal impacts, but we do not get any revenue slowdown or revenue impact from the federal stimulus there. Right now, it's just expenditure reimbursement. What their advice is, do not take any action that limits city management's flexibility and cash management options in dealing with the potential financial stress. I think they've said that numerous times. Every single rating agency has said that. Be flexible, be nimble, be able to manage this crisis, because this crisis, we don't know how long it's going to last and what the total economic impact it will be and how long. We talk about a V curve and a U curve and an L curve, and I think most economists and most people are saying a V curve is probably not going to happen, but a U curve will. There is also talk about stagflation, where you have inflation rising and economic and a high unemployment. So there is some concern that we need to be flexible and nimble when we look at our strategies. 2 recent rating reports from S&P and Fitch, and there's some comments there. Given the abruptness and scale of the economic decline, we anticipate broad budgetary pressure. Local communities whose employment composition is concentrated in sectors including tourism are doubly exposed. Concentrated economic activity, particularly in leisure, energy, and trade, are more likely to see revenue declines. And I think the last sentence is, Fitch is reviewing the adequacy of each issuer's available tools as a management willingness to utilize them. That's one of the things that comes out is use all the tools in your toolbox to make sure that you can cover and have your cash flow cover what you need for the essential services that you're going to need to be required.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mayor,
Yeah.
we have council members that have questions.
Okay, yeah, come on back up, Alice. Okay.
Councilmember Wilson?
Well, I apologize. I really had a question for Dr. Lindsay. Is it too late to ask her a question?
Is Dr. Lindsay still on?
Dr. Lindsay?
Dr. Lindsay is still on.
Okay.
Dr. Lindsay, I've been watching very closely the numbers of Virginia and also Virginia Beach, and looking at the numbers and trying to figure out when the curve is going to flatten. With you looking at it, do you have any idea when our curve might flatten?
There are a number of models currently out there, and we are our Virginia Department of Health is working with University UVA to try to help come up with a model for Virginia, but and possibly somewhere down the line look at particular localities to give us a better idea of that. I would not be able to give you that today. I would say even if we had a model for Virginia, different communities across the state are at different levels. However, with that being said, we're one of those larger communities where we appear to be somewhat out ahead in terms of community level transmission. But I don't know that I would be able to give you a good estimate at this time.
We're seeing that Washington State and New York, they're starting to see some favorable conditions in turning. And of course, we always want to think good thoughts and hope for the best. I know we're preparing for the worst, but
We don't, from
indication.
what we've seen, I apologize, I didn't know you were speaking.
Whenever you have any indication, if you'll please advise us.
Yes, I will. I was going to say that we don't seem to be seeing a significant increase. We seem to be at a kind of steady high right now. But it does hopefully appear that our numbers are not quite as high as they could have been, you know, looking at some models. So there's a good chance that the interventions that we're using are helping in terms of lowering the peak. What we have seen in a number of models is that we layer all of these interventions, the social distancing, the case and contact investigations, trying to ensure as much as possible people are educated and aware of the importance of taking the basic steps that we talk about, that we are flattening that peak and also delaying the peak as well. It appears that that may be the case. Some of the challenges we have are that our test results in the past month were lagging behind, and that appears to be improving. We're seeing a much better turnaround time from the labs within a few days, and something. Apologize, it's not giving you all of the information that you are asking for, but hopefully within the near future, we will have better information on modeling that's specific to Virginia.
Thank you.
Councilmember Tower.
I'd like to ask Ms. Kelly to elaborate, if she could, on the tools in the toolkit. If she could let us know what she thinks are the most important tools that we have in the toolkit to stay nimble and take all actions that our financial advisors suggest we do to survive intact here.
Been doing this, you know, the first one in the GFOA's Cash is King toolbox is reduce personnel cost. And I think putting a hiring freeze on is something that is a significant way to reduce expenses. We also can reduce capital spending, and capital assets are very costly, and so delaying some of those. It takes some time to do that, though, because things are underway and you have to take a look at that. You can also reduce material or contractors' cost. We can take a look, and what we've been doing is taking a look at what people are requesting for spending and labeling it level 1, 2, and 3. I'm speaking to that wrong. Level 1 is obviously COVID and emergency purchases. Those go through immediately. Level 2 is essential spending. The city manager has defined essential spending as public safety and emergency operations, water, sewer, waste management, traffic operations, and those are level 2. And then anything that's level 3 is being stopped or very seriously considered why we need to do it. And so those are the three big ones that we are using to start in our toolbox. The other thing that we need to also look at is how we issue our debt. We might need to, instead of doing competitive sale, do a negotiated sale. We might need to look at using a line of credit. Those are all in our toolbox. There's some other ideas of personnel and other reducing of expenditures that we can look at.
Councilmember Wooten?
Yes, I'd like to go back to Dr. Lindsay and follow up on the point regarding the curve. My question is, I saw an article recently that said that there will be a spike or a projected spike in cases in May. However, the article also mentioned that this, I guess, the level of impact will be determined by how well the public follows guidelines. Could you speak to that point or maybe elaborate on the public's response and the importance of the public following those guidelines that have been established by our governor?
I think that there are a number of models out there, although at this point I'm not aware of one specific to Virginia. Not to say that there isn't. That said, looking at the models in general, there are different curves that can be projected based on the level of different interventions that can be taken. So one example would be social distancing. With enacting social distancing, depending on how much of a community response you have to that, you can see a lowering of the peak and a delay in the onset of community transmission in a given area. With contact and case investigations, there's another curve showing a decrease in that peak and again a delay. And what we're aiming for is to try to have a cumulative impact by doing all of these things, closing our schools, having closure of our businesses so that there's less interaction, and asking people to stay at home, but also doing our case and contact investigations. So it's very important if we are to try to bring the number of cases and also the number of very serious illness down and deaths, such that we're not taxing our health system to bring over beyond the capacity that we can address issues. It's very important that these measures are followed. So the governor is taking very important actions to try to reduce that level of transmission in our community through these steps. The additional action now of asking people if they must be in public to wear a mask is for the purpose of trying to further reduce transmission. So if the wearer is wearing a mask, then they catch germs as they're admitted and hopefully decrease the opportunity for someone nearby to acquire the infection from them, particularly if they're within that less than 6 feet distance.
I appreciate that because we do hear the constant directive to stay at home, stay at home. However, along with that piece, we must also make sure we emphasize the reason that you really need to stay at home is because our response will impact the severity of the spreading of the virus. So thank you.
Are there any additional questions for Dr. Lindsay? If so, can you please raise your virtual hand? So the remaining questions will be for Ms. Kelly. The next council member who would like to speak is Councilmember Moss.
Good afternoon, Ms. Kelly, and to all my fellow members of City Council. It's a beautiful day out. I can look out the window, but we're all here working like we should be. I do have a couple questions, but first an observation. I believe any financial manager would tell any business or any homeowner to maximize their liquidity. So I don't know that the city's liquidity has any higher priority than a business or a homeowner, since that's who we represent. So I hope we don't lose track of that in our discussions later today. But I would like to turn to the remarks and get back to the point that Councilmember Tower brought up about important tools in the toolbox. I couldn't agree more with the advice that you got from your financial advisors. Is the first thing is to look at your personnel costs, because your debt service you can't do much about, nor your utilities. I noticed a number of communities across the country and the Commonwealth have mentioned a tool which you did not mention, and maybe the longer we wait to address it, the less cash we can recover. But furloughing of non-essential personnel is in our toolbox. And I mentioned it Tuesday a week ago. I noticed the city manager did not talk to it in his assessment. And I noticed you didn't mention it as one of the tools. But is that not a tool in our toolbox? And is that a tool that we are looking at?
Certainly, it is a tool that we're looking at and have estimated some of the cost, but it's not anything that we have planned for the immediate future.
I think if we're going to ask families to maintain our liquidity that we say we have to have, we need to make sure that we are minimizing the liquidity that we have to have before we ask people to maybe go without, because we're unable to provide them the tax relief that they might need and how long structurally this might be. So I'll be looking forward to seeing how my peers decide risk should be spread in the community, and we'll have that discussion later. But back to Ms. Kelly, the monthly burn rate for the city and the unrestricted general fund was how much in February? Do you know that number?
I know it off the top of my
Alice.
head.
You have to give it a chance to get back to the screen before you start responding.
I'm sorry.
You need to wait till he gets back to the screen before you respond.
Okay.
Thank you.
It varies month by month just because of what bills are due. It's between 100 and 150 when it's a million, when it's there's an outflow, and then we have 250 when we have inflows, when the real estate taxes come in.
What revenue? I thought, because we talk about we've shifting because of these directions that the city manager has taken, which I think are not aggressive enough. Let me just say that up front. But the actions that we have taken to date, how much in terms of percentage and dollar terms have they reduced our monthly burn rate? Have we really materially changed our monthly burn rate over what it was before we started down this COVID-19 expense and income receipt? We must have had a normal burn rate, and now we've supposedly, by freezing, by doing a number of things, we're reducing that burn rate. What's the monthly burn rate we have reduced?
We're estimating that will be about $20 million for the rest of the month, each month, in expenditure reductions. We need to, look at all the encumbrances that we're delaying or postponing or eliminating, as well as hiring freeze also does we have a very, our hiring turns over. So it's just a hiring freeze. Things you think you're not just hiring another one person, but you might lose two people and then not hiring that one person. So there's a major impact with a hiring freeze. I don't have that dollar amount exactly for each month. David, did you know that off the top of your head? No.
Let me add, though, this is Tom Leahy, let me add that there is a pretty good lag between the event and the time that we receive the records to be able to determine what actually has changed. So it was only a little more than 2 weeks ago, maybe between 2 and 3 weeks ago, that we froze hiring and froze unnecessary expenditures. It could very well be into May before we can tell you what the actual benefit of that was. I see David Bradley coming up. He wants to say a few words.
Just one thing I would add to that, I think Mr. Leahy's exactly right. You know, you're going to see an impact of that in the next month or so. But for next fiscal year, for the first 6 months, we assumed it was just under $10 million what we would gain by having that hiring freeze over that 6 months. So if you divide that by 6 months, you could see you just be under $2 million a month. And that's what our anticipation is. Now, we actually think, you know, there are some additional positions, not additional, we assume some public safety and some critical positions will be exempt from the freeze, and that $10 million that I'm talking about takes that into account. So that is the net of what we think we will get over 6 months based on the position freeze and exempting critical positions.
Vice Mayor Wood.
Is John done? He looks like he was getting ready to say something.
I'm not finished, no. I want to keep talking. The other question I had, if I'm still on, I hope I am. Am I on? Good, thank you. If you note, I asked back last fall about how many positions by pay period we had vacant on average, and it was over 500. So we were carrying those savings every month along the way. And so only to the extent that, and I'm sure that was taken into account in the assessment, I hope it was, so only the extent that our number of additional vacancies created by the freeze between now here and 30 June, are we getting over and above labor cost savings that we have already anticipated? I only mention this because if we're going to say that the liquidity of the city is a higher priority than the financial health of our businesses and our families, and we can take no further expenditure reductions, and that we are tied into the bureaucratic inertia that we're suffering under, in my opinion, then we really don't have any tools to be talking about in our discussion later today. And I just think that we have incomplete information, but so do families. So do families who are unemployed. So do businesses that can't open. They have uncertainty. They have cash flow liquidity. So I hope in our discussions later today, and I won't go on and ask more questions because I don't think the answers are available today, but we can't wait till we have all the answers. But one thing they are right about is that we have to use all the tools in our toolbox, and we have to create cash liquidity, but largely by reducing our expenditures more aggressively than the city manager has proposed. And I hope to talk about that later during our workshop. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Wood.
Thank you, and I appreciate the information that you provided to us in advance regarding different financial impacts and strategies. And I'm looking through this document that we got on Friday from Mr. Leahy that's, I guess, about 5 pages long. And my question for Ms. Kelly specifically, in light of your comment about the bond agencies worrying about what's going to impact city management's flexibility. So this proposal for the 3-month hiatus on the meal tax, it says on page 2 of this document, based on current budget conditions and cash flow models, Virginia Beach would be able to absorb a 3-month holiday for the meals tax. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. That is not what our financial advisor nor bond rating agencies advise us to do, but it is accurate that we have the ability to do that. You know, it's a quandary that council has to develop policies for city to be able to provide essential services and be good and be there for the citizens and be there for quite frankly, spending money, because the city does spend a lot of money in the locality and helps provide. You know, we are still cranking out accounts payable checks every other week and providing businesses with business to do work, as well as having to take into account citizens and businesses that are in the city and how we can help them. So it's a sword that you have to figure out which one's what are the best strategies for that.
I think David wants to add to that.
Sure.
I just want to add on to what Ms. Kelly was saying. So the restaurant tax generates about $6 million a month. So in normal circumstances, that'd be a loss of about $18 million over that 3 months. We're estimating right now, and this is just our best guess. We've studied Old Dominion and different economists that have put information out, that we'd be getting about 25% of the restaurant tax. So of that, 18 million, we'd be getting maybe 4.5 over the 3-month period in the current circumstances. The way it would work, and as part of this is the accrual, if council implements that in May of this year, there'd be 1 month of that would apply to this fiscal year, and there'd be 2 months that would apply to next fiscal year. So even though you would implement it in May, we get the cash in June, that would go to fiscal year 20. But the June amount actually comes in July, and that will count to the new fiscal year along with the July payment. So of that amount, 1 month will apply to this fiscal year and 2 months to next fiscal year.
Vice Mayor Wood?
So, Mr. Bradley, then, I'm just trying to figure this out. So you're saying it's $6 million a month is what this generates. So how are we getting to 27.5 million?
On the analysis that you saw in front of you, restaurant tax was part of that, but it also included the loss of what we're projecting in emissions, which we're assuming 0% for the rest of the year, and it also included loss of hotel. So we were only assuming 10% a month. So that $27 million figure is in addition to the restaurant tax and includes all trustee taxes.
So the $6 million a month assumes that we're getting 100% of our projected restaurant revenues, correct?
That $27 million figure, Vice Mayor, that you're referring to, we were assuming only 25% for the month of April, which had actually come in May. And then that, since we knew that council was looking at this, we assumed 25% for 2 of the months and 0% collection for the last month. So we're not assuming, that $27 million shows you the loss, taking into account what we think is going to happen from a collection standpoint and council implementing this possible 3-month restaurant tax holiday, which would start in this fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Tower?
I'm sorry, I don't have an additional question at this point.
Councilmember Wilson?
Yes, I wanted to ask some questions of David Bradley again. I'm sorry, do y'all hear me? But, Mr. Bradley, I kind of think that we should do the meals tax holiday through the end of July. And I talked to the mayor about this on yesterday. I think June 10th is what we should do because that's the date set by the governor. I'd like to start it sooner than May 1st. I don't know the earliest that we could start it, but to have a quicker impact than waiting till May, but then ending it with the same date as the governor. And then if we find it needed to be extended, we always could. So I guess looking at the 25% of what we normally get, million, how much money would that be to help save our restaurants?
And part of that, the answer to your question is, and I'm looking at Mark, but I do not think you can change it in mid-month because of the point of sale systems that are put in place. I believe they have to have that done on a monthly basis and be able to remit the appropriate tax. Now, I'm not totally sure of that, but my understanding is it would have to be done on a monthly basis. And to answer your question, once again, we know, I mean, that restaurant tax is about $72 million a year. It's generally equally spread by month. I mean, obviously there's certain months we don't get as much, but, roughly $6 million. So if we only get 25% of it, and once again, it's just our best estimate based on what we know, we'd get $1.5 million. So of that 6. So depending on how many months council would like to do it, you can kind of do the math off of that.
Speaking to Mr. Harmeyer, I believe you've explained it correctly. There is some time that is required to change over the point of sale, and I think there was concern about trying to do it in the middle of a month.
Councilmember Wilson?
Yes. So does that mean you also couldn't end it in the middle of the month, like June 10th, like the governor has set his date?
I think the answer is it's by month, Mrs. Wilson. I think once you pick a month, I think that would be taxed for the entire month. Would you agree with that, Mark?
That's my understanding of the situation.
Councilmember Wilson?
Yes. So my other question is, looking at the state, I know when the governor spoke last Friday and did his press conference, he was talking about the state and their budget and looking at cutting expenditures and changing the budget that they just passed, as well as this year's budget. And looking back at 2008, when we had the other recession, and what the state did, I mean, we took a really big blow from the state. And what the more seasoned council members will remember is aid from localities. Not only did they cut our budget, but they asked us to help them with theirs. We were sending them about $10 million a year, and it took us years to get out of that. So we don't know what they're going to do, and desperate times takes desperate measures, and they did it before, they could do that again. Have you heard anything what the state might be doing?
So, Mrs. Wilson, I, have heard, we're like everybody trying to figure out what's going on. It looks like what I've read from what the governor said is he's kind of offered what we did when we presented the budget, at least for now, that they would look at certain points in next fiscal year to see where the revenue's at before they implement certain things. The big impact from the state for us would be on the school system. We're estimating that the schools will probably lose about $21 million through our funding formula for the end of this fiscal year. So we have been in contact with Farrell and his budget and finance folks within the schools to start having that conversation. But I haven't seen anything definite yet on how they would change revenue and how it would impact us. For the city, there's probably 3 or 4 things that we would be looking at. VDOT maintenance money that we get, which generally they have not touched that I've seen in the past. We get the $599 money for the fact that we have a police force, a urban police force, where counties get that money through the constitutional officers. Of course, human services would possibly get an impact, and then our constitutional officers. So we'd definitely on the city side be looking for that and see how those state impacts hit us. But we haven't seen anything specific at this point.
Thank you.
Mo- Councilmember Moss.
Thank you so much. I want to return to the school question because I noticed Ms. Kelly mentioned that the school is in the process of relooking, and they're a major part of local revenues go to the school. So kind of reminds me, I don't know how many read the book about Lee Iacocca when he took over Chrysler and he realized they were making 4,000 cars a year and their break-even point was, 4 million cars a year is what they're going to make, but 2 million was their break-even point. Well, clearly our break-even point's being redefined by the COVID virus in terms of our cash flow and expenses. So when is the school board planning and the school system to have finished their, what I would call their leaning of their expenditures and a better appreciation? Or I know Mr. Councilman Wood won't take all the credit. He mentioned about their facilities are basically closed, the utilities. When are they going to be able to identify to us based upon their changed circumstances? And also they've had some increased costs too, but when, what their new cost curve is as we anticipate ending on 30 June versus it was going to be before the COVID, taking into account they had an ending fund balance last year of $26 million roughly. So what is their ability to, because that's part of their cash flow, but we got to still push the money over. So when is that going to be available?
So, Mr. Moss, we have had conversations with them. I know some of the immediate savings that they're expecting, obviously, and it's somewhat big just because of the number of facilities, is some of the utility cost savings that will happen in the schools, along with some of the fuel savings from not running the buses. We kind of came up with that year-end projection of what we think will happen. We've communicated that to Farrell, so I know they're looking at this year. We plan on providing City Council by Friday updated budget proposal for next year. Based on what we're looking at, I think the schools could expect another $20+ million reduction going into next year. They were actually supposed to be here today. It's interesting, on April 7th to discuss their budget, and obviously with all the things happening in the economy, it's not feasible. So we have suggested to them that as they get all this information, and they have a huge impact from the state, much more than us, if they could come back by April 28th. Now that certainly council can change that, but that was our suggestion once we give them this information so that they can, kind of work through it and work through the impacts of the state. But those are the understanding I have, Mr. Moss, now. Of course, they have a lot of contractual employees, too, that they have contracts signed through the end of the year. So there are some fixed costs for them.
Mr. Mayor, the reason why I asked that question, because even as the school, and they have to get to what they consider to be their new cost curve to properly invest and educate our kids, community's children, if in fact the state revenue falls short of that when combined with our traditional funding formula, which I've always said, underfund schools in bad times and overfunds them in good times. Well, now that we're in the not so good times, the funding formula will probably fall short of what we as a community really want to do. And I only mention that because then that puts, getting back to the cash balance question earlier, puts further stress factors on our side to say, if in fact there is a delta and we decide to make up that delta for our kids, then that's further reductions that we have to take on what has traditionally been the city side. So I only mention that because I've sent you some emails in this regard. I don't know that we're going to know the sufficient knowledge to take risk, what we're voting on the 12th of May, but maybe we are, but I'll save that for another discussion. But I do think the area where we have the highest fixed cost because a classroom takes a teacher. And the buses, they have to get there. There's going to, 85% of their bill is labor, and most of it's in the classroom, but not all of it. So they certainly, the superintendent can look at the overhead and probably cut that some more if we have to. But there isn't going to be as much margin of non-essentiality expenses on the school side as I believe we have on the city. So I think that's why I say I don't believe we are being aggressive enough in looking at the considerations and betting on the come that there's going to be this big outflow of cash from the feds to fill in the difference. I'm not sure that we can get there when we adopt our budget. But I do think the sooner the schools can come back to us, and if that's 28 April, it's 28 April. I'd rather get a right answer than an incomplete answer. But we do need to know that schools' bottom line piece. And I don't think we can think that the normal ending fund balance policy that we have will necessarily hold in this situation, because this is a special circumstances. And I think it's the extent that there are trustee accounts that are fungible by us, unlike the enterprise accounts, that we have to be putting, all the cash in the same family pot and then deciding what bills have to really be paid and how much we have to put aside. And I think that's a non-traditional approach, but these are non-traditional times. Thank you.
Councilmember Henley.
It's time.
That's all the questions, sir.
Okay, thank you. That was a very informative group of presentations that we've had, and I think it's becoming more obvious every day that we are in uncharted waters. And I think the biggest challenge we have, that we don't have an end date when this crisis is going to, come to a close. But in the meantime, we're going to have to deal probably almost, if not bi-weekly, but sometimes daily, with the challenges that come up here. But I think it's important to realize that concurrently with dealing with the budget, I believe we're going to have a new budget presentation coming out. There will probably be more challenges coming forward as we go forward. But the thing is, it really incumbent on us to have a strategy that once this crisis ends, that we're ready to launch and, get business going and enable the businesses to get open, to get people back to work and do whatever we can, to, restore our economy, in spite of things going forward. Okay, at this point, moving on, we have a couple requests for add-ons, ordinances, and Mr. Wood, I ask you to bring them forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For housekeeping purposes, we need to formally add a couple of items to the agenda. All members of council have already received these via email, and they have been advertised on the city website, but we do need to add them so that we can discuss and vote on them later. So the motion I'm going to be making is just to add them to the agenda, and then we will discuss, and there'll be a subsequent vote on whether or not we approve them. The first item, and the city attorney advises that I need to read the entire ordinance, so I apologize in advance for that. The first one is an ordinance to amend the city's continuity of government ordinance to set forth the manner and form of budget hearings. Whereas the city manager has declared a local emergency during the current COVID-19 pandemic, whereas the governor has issued 3 executive orders, EO 51, EO 53, EO 55, that have increasingly focused on the need for the residents of the Commonwealth to stay at home during the emergency. Whereas, although the executive orders exempt the operation of government from their restrictions, the City Council does not desire people to leave their homes to attend a public hearing if there are opportunities to meaningfully participate in public hearings through alternative means. Whereas Executive Order 55 is in effect until June 10th, which does not allow simply postponing the city's scheduled budget hearings for the budget and allow the city to comply with the requirements of Section 22.1-93 of the Code of Virginia to fund schools by May 15th. Whereas the city is required to hold at least 2 public hearings during the budget process if the council is to provide the revenues to support the city manager's proposed budget. Whereas the public hearing required for the adoption of the city's operating budget and capital improvement program and the bonds required for the CIP is to be held on April 22nd, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. Whereas the public hearing required for the city to enact the proposed tax rate and the city manager's proposed budget is to be held on April 28th, 2020 at 6 p.m. Whereas the city council believes that it is consistent with its purposes of protecting the public health and general welfare to provide for participation by means other than physical gatherings, now therefore be it ordained by the City Council of the City of Virginia Beach, Virginia, that because of limitations and restrictions set forth in executive orders by the Virginia governor, the City Council hereby amends its previously adopted continuity of government ordinance to provide for the holding of public hearings as required to enact the city's FY 2021 operating budget and CIP. The holding of such public hearings in the previously announced and advertised locations is inconsistent with the current stay-at-home order issued for the emergency. The funding of government is a requirement for the continuing functioning of the city. The following shall apply to such public hearings. A, the required hearings for the city's FY 2021 operating budget and CIP shall be held virtually and without a quorum of the council assembled at a given place. The city shall retain the dates and times for the required budget public hearings as were previously announced and advertised. B, public comment may be solicited by electronic means in advance and shall also be solicited through telephonic or other electronic means during the course of the hearing. All such public comments will be provided to members of the council at or before the virtual meetings and made part of the record for such meeting. C, the city clerk shall cause a notice of such hearing to be posted prominently on the city's website. Such notice shall include a statement informing the public that the hearing will not be conducted at the location provided, the location stated in the published notice. So, Mr. Mayor, I move that that be added to the agenda.
That being said, do I have a second?
Mr. Jones?
I second the motion.
Okay, we're open for council discussion on whether to add it to the agenda.
No council members have raised their hand for discussion.
Okay, let's call for the vote.
Councilmember Abbott?
Aye.
Councilmember Berlucci?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
I did raise.
Councilmember Moss?
I said.
Councilmember Tower?
Aye.
Councilmember Rouse?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood?
Aye.
Mayor Dyer?
Aye.
I'd like to go back to Councilmember Moss.
I'll just wait till the thing's voted on, but there is just a further amplification on that 15 May thing has a statutory requirement for which there is no penalty and cities have not followed it, but that will come up later.
By a vote of 11-0, you have approved the request to add to the agenda the ordinance requested by Vice Mayor Wood to allow the budget public hearings to be conducted virtually.
Okay, thank you. And moving forward, Mr. Wood, on the other ordinance suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This next ordinance is an ordinance to suspend meals tax for the months of May, June, and July, and to provide offsets for such tax suspension during the COVID-19 pandemic. Whereas the Virginia Code empowers the governing body of a city to impose a meals tax upon prepared food in the city, and the council can prescribe the rate of such meals tax. Whereas the city manager has declared and the city council has confirmed a local emergency during the current COVID-19 pandemic. Whereas widespread closures, social distancing, and recommendations to avoid public gatherings have limited restaurants to takeout or delivery only. Whereas the city council desires to provide an economic incentive for the residents of the city to utilize restaurants for takeout or delivery during the emergency. Now therefore be it ordained by the city council of the city of Virginia Beach, Virginia that 1, the meals tax rate set forth in section 35-137 of the city code shall be reduced from 5.5% to 0% for applicable transactions occurring in May 2020, June 2020, and July 2020. Number 2, if notwithstanding the prior section, any food establishment collects meal taxes during May 2020, June 2020, and July 2020 from the patrons of food establishments as that term is defined in section 35-136 of the city code, then those taxes shall be remitted to the city. Food establishments are not entitled to a refund for such amounts collected as a meals tax, notwithstanding the change in rate set forth in section 1 supra. 3, to provide offsets in fiscal year 2019-20 for the reduced revenues from the change in rate set forth in section 1 supra, the council makes the following recommended reductions. A, for the tip fund, a reduction of $1,077,720 in the future CIP reserve. B, for the TAP fund, a reduction of $508,359, provided, however, if year-end obligations for advertisement contracts do not allow for the full reduction, such resulting shortfall shall be made by further reduction in future CIP reserve in the TIP fund. C, for the open space fund, a reduction in the transfer to the CIP by $447,356. This transfer reduction shall apply to pay-as-you-go financing, which shall be reduced $447,356 in CIP number 4-306, Open Space and Parks Infrastructure Development and Maintenance 2. D, for the general fund, a reduction of $2,352,610 to be taken from vacancy savings in the following departments and estimated amounts, and such amounts may be adjusted from the named department amounts to allow the total reduction to equal $2,352,610. 1, Department of Human Services, $784,204. 2, Police Department, $784,203. And 3, Department of Public Works, $784,203. Number 4, the City Council requests the Virginia Beach School Board provide offsets for the amount of meal taxes that will be subject to the city and schools revenue sharing formula in the amount of $1,217,901. If no such offset is provided, the City Council directs the city manager to make a reservation in the general fund's undesignated fund balance. The City Council reserves the right to capture such offset from any fiscal year reversion occurring after the adoption of this ordinance. So moved to add to the agenda, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Councilmember Jones?
I'm not seconding the motion. I don't approve of it.
Okay, do we have a second?
Councilmember Moss?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we will now open it for discussion. The discussion will be to determine if this is allowed to be put on the agenda, and be assured there will be, when we discuss the item later under ordinances at the proper time, we will also have the opportunity for more discussion. So, any discussion at this point?
No, sir.
Okay, can we call for the vote?
I'm sorry, Councilmember Rouse raised his virtual hand.
All right, I think we just got this on Sunday. Now, while I agree that we should suspend the meals tax, there's a lot of other information in here that was added that I don't agree with. We're looking at a reduction of open space, reversion funds from schools, reduction in the tip fund, the TAP fund. I mean, there's a lot of information in here which I don't think I've been briefed enough on to really make this decision. Now, I agree we probably could, we should suspend the meals tax, but with police department and reduction in the general fund of, I mean, Bradley, can Bradley or someone else come and explain this to me? There's just a lot of information in here. We just got it on Sunday, and no one has really explained this thoroughly. You've read the ordinance, but can someone fully walk us through this and explain exactly what, how did you guys get these numbers?
Mr. Rouse, those numbers are based on the council policies that are in place. So the different dedications that you have in place for the tourism advertising program, tourism investment program, open space, which gets part of the restaurant tax, the school funding formula gets part of the restaurant tax, and then the general fund. So what we did is use as we would with any budget item like this, it reflects the dedications that City Council has in place. So, for example, the open space, you mentioned that one, that, you know, if we're going to reduce the restaurant tax and keep City Council's policies in place, then the open space fund would take part of the adjustment. On the general fund side, since we're near the end of the year, we were just trying to find where we would believe there would be money available right now. And as council knows, there's a certain number of vacancies in the police department, as well as some of those other larger departments, and that's where we chose to do this. You know, we have to have a balanced budget, so if council changes the estimated revenue, we have to have an offsetting appropriation.
Okay.
Those taxes are appropriated. Can someone explain to me how you all came up with item number 4 in this, the language for this? If no such offset is provided, the city council directs the city manager to make a reservation in the general's fund, undesignated fund balance.
So, Mr. Rouse, once again, part of the restaurant tax goes to the school system. So if we reduce that estimated revenue, the school funding formula, the way it's in place, would also include a reduction to the school system. So we would have to work with the schools to see what they would want their offsetting item to be. And I'm sure they would work with us. I know they know that they're expecting a loss of $21 million anyway in this fiscal year. But if for some reason we didn't get it, then we would say, okay, instead of giving you all of your reversion amount back, we would take this amount off the top before we do it. Once again, just trying to follow the city council policies that are in place regarding funding formulas and rate dedications.
No further question.
Councilmember Henley?
I have a lot of the same concerns that Mr. Rouse has. I believe this is premature. I don't believe that adding this to the agenda under these circumstances follows our policies. And I will address later on why I'm not going to be supporting it. But I really don't think it should be added to the agenda.
Call for the vote.
Okay, if I could just say, and I certainly respect what Ms. Henley and Mr. Rouse said in terms of, you know, concerns. But once again, I think it was requested by several council members, you know, that this item be brought forward because the main thing that the restaurant industry is taking a major, major hit with the current situation already, and they were looking to find, some methods, to help out. And the other thing is, too, is I think going forward, as we come up with ideas as neither council individually or as a collective, that, the fiscal impacts of trade-offs that are going to be necessary to implement these things. But once again, we are in very tough times. We're trying to help as many people as we can. We are in a very uncertain situation, and we're just trying to help out, but we certainly welcome the opportunities, whatever come up with any council person that wants to bring something forward to you at least hear what's going on. So at least right now, the vote is simply to see if we want to tack it on to the agenda. And, that is the purpose of the vote right now, but certainly,
We have one other additional council member who'd like to speak. Councilmember Wilson?
I understand that this is only to put it on the, whether to put it on the agenda or not, but I do want to state that I think the 3-month period is too long. As I had said earlier, I wish we could start it sooner and end it with the governor's date. I would like to see this, if we go forward, to be the months of May and June. And if we get into the month of June and we find out that it is working and it is helping both families and the restaurants and all the people that work there, and the economy is not better and we're still in lockdown, then we could vote to extend it into the month of July. But I just think that going all the way to the end of July is just too long. I think we can take it gradually. Thank you.
Call for the,
okay, we call for the vote. And Mr. Stiles, do I understand we need a unanimous vote on this to bring it forward?
No, sir. Under your existing city code provision, you need a supermajority of 2/3, which in this case would be 8 affirmative votes.
Okay, just wanted to make that, clear going forward, and I truly respect the concerns of every council member. Okay, we'll call for the vote, please.
Councilmember Abbott?
Aye.
Councilmember Berlucci?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Nay.
Councilmember Jones?
Nay.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Councilmember Tower?
Aye.
Councilmember Rouse?
Nay.
Councilmember Wilson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood?
Aye.
Mayor Dyer?
Aye.
8-3.
Okay, this will be placed on the agenda, and there will be, we will welcome further discussion on this. Okay. Okay, so the 2 items will be added to the ordinances. At this point, we are now open for council discussion. Item number 1 on tax deferrals.
Councilmember Rouse?
I wanted to speak on the ordinance we just added to the agenda, or the ordinance we just added to the agenda. So I'll wait till that comes.
Councilmember Wilson?
Sorry.
Regarding tax deferrals? I see none raising their hand.
Okay, given the next item is suspension of the meals tax, and it's on the ordinances, could we just, instead of discussing it now, discuss it during the time, of the discussion on the ordinance?
That's up to you as the
Yeah.
convener of the meeting.
I think we're going to have a robust discussion on this item, when it comes up, for approval. So if we can, we'll just go ahead and move forward to reduction of the personal property tax rate.
I apologize. Councilmember Moss has requested to speak on the tax deferrals.
Okay, welcome, John.
Sorry about that. I think, well, I do support the deferrals. I think we all ought to probably recognize that some people, and I guess we'll find that out along the way, won't be in a position even to pay on August 1st. And I guess part of the forecast has acknowledged that. And I don't know, but I think we ought to also be thinking about, and not today, of course, but whether or not we want to extend the period by which people can file an appeal of their proposed July 1st tax land value. Currently, I believe that ends like in end of July or end of August, maybe, and then they set it back to July 1st because people may not be able to collect enough of the income of how their properties have been affected since March 13th, and then gather their analysis about how that will carry forward in terms of the income generation of their property that would allow them to meet the evidence test for restaurants and hotels to get their July 1st book value for 2020 adjusted. So we want to think about that. And secondly, knowing that how they are with those payments and whatnot, that will probably carry forward. That terms of that financial stress. When we have our discussion about next year's budget, we're going to have to get some insights from the real estate assessor as how the income method and how that affects them. The impact on residential property will show up in the normal sales data, but we might be over assessing certain commercial properties based upon the long-term carryover effect that's forecasted in those industries. So I don't think 1 August is going to make the people have any greater cash flow per se than they had on 5 June, but the extent that that gives them time to exercise the various SBA loans and other things, and hopefully Councilman Wilson's right, will get some relief and improve their cash flows through the latter part of June, July, and August. But I do think it's going to, for many of our businesses that are outright closed, 1 August was helpful, but we shouldn't expect that we're not going to hear petitions for further extensions.
Okay,
That's
is
all.
that the, okay. Okay, so is there any other further discussion on reduction of the personal property tax rate?
No council members have raised their hand.
Okay, the next area for city council discussion are areas for expenditure reductions.
Any council member wishing to speak if they'd raise their virtual hand? Councilmember Moss?
I know I talked about this earlier, but as I said, I did not think that the city manager's proposals to date have been aggressive enough. I think we need to look at all the construction projects, just like companies are doing, and have a much more aggressive reduction in our capital expenditures. And to the extent that that backs into planning activities or contracts that are in place or about to be in place or can be truncated at the appropriate milestone and capture the engineering data, need to be on the plate. It's hard to just say water quality projects might be one of those. Certainly there's regulatory relief being provided by the fed and state as a consequence of this pandemic that we're dealing with. I think we can't walk away from looking at furloughs to actually further reduce our labor cost. I think we have to ask, when do we reopen the libraries? Do we take that through the end of the fiscal year to give us some more space? If the fact it's lifted on 10 June, do we remain the recreation centers closed through 30 June if in fact it's lifted on 10 June? These aren't nice to think of things to do, but it hasn't been nice decisions that our businesses have had to make. So I don't think we could have a whole discussion and go through the budget line by line item, but I think part of the thing is we should set a target that we're looking for to provide getting back to the personal property tax relief, if we wanted to provide a 10% discount relief, that'd be about $16 million. Well, I don't know if that's possible. What would we have to do to generate $16 million? I think those are the kind of scenarios that I would would have gotten, is here's some set cases. But if we as a council are embracing the cost structure that we have and saying it has to be maintained at the expense of our residents and businesses, then we just need to say that, vote for that, and accept that, and then the public can judge us on the merits of our reasoning for doing so. But I just don't think we can insulate ourselves. So I think there's plenty of room. How about some of those positions that have been vacant? Just saying, maybe those structurally don't get filled. So how many of those are truly doing mission essential? I'm not saying they're not fulfilling a requirement, but maybe it's a requirement that in today's environment that we can't afford to ask our taxpayers to pay for. Now, I don't know how aggressive is this new version of the budget we're going to get, but it historically has been a culture and organization that's never had to deal truly with this sizable amount of cash flow impact, and also with so much uncertainty. And as the bond council people and the financial advisors are saying, increase your liquidity, increase your uncertainty, which means you have to reduce your expenditures. And maybe we can't grant personal property relief. Okay, that's fine. I can accept that. But let's still find the $16 million going into this year's budget and next, so that we can increase our liquidity, because we have pushed our cost curve to the left and not just pass the bill on to people who aren't in a position. Now, there are many people in our community who are fortunately not being as greatly impacted by the COVID virus. Unfortunately, our very blunt revenue collection tools, which is real estate, which in next year's budget we hope to collect about $626 million roughly, or $627 million roughly, is a wealth tax. So whether you've lost your job or lost your business may not affect the price of your home, you're still expected to pay your tax. Personal property tax is a wealth tax. You bought a nice car, more than $20,000, and now the state gives a break on the first 20, but not the latter part, not the part over that. So you get a big bill come May. Now a household's probably paying maybe $1,800 that we want up front. And then our other taxes that we have are regressive taxes that disproportionately impact the people most impacted in the service and retail industry. So we have rather blunt fiscal policy that we can adopt. So we can't target it like the feds can to those who need the most. But nonetheless, we're looking to increase our budget 3.1% as it now stands, or 60-something million dollars. Well, maybe we should be looking at taking our current budget, which was operating budget for the city alone, city and schools, it's about a little higher. Schools, it's like $2 billion total, but the city portion was $1.2 billion roughly, bringing that down by 10%, and then not increasing it at all. I think that our discussion of bias is that the city should be more insulated from change than the overall people that we support. And so I have trouble with the philosophy that the management has carried into the discussion, and hopefully I'm proved wrong with this revised budget, and I want to be proved wrong, but my experience is that we're not going to be aggressive enough in reducing expenditures. And while open space is nice and other things are nice, so is people staying in their home and keeping their business open is also nice and probably necessary. So that's more observations and questions, but I think it's a theme that carries through the heavy lifting. And I've sent some ideas in. I'm going to send some more in. But it's really a discussion that I believe that we should have an idea that, is this a 3.1% budget, the budget we want, and have the fees and taxes? Or is our fiscal direction to the guidance to the manager up front is that we want a budget that's no more than the budget we approved and for the current year. And we're going to find $60 million of structural growth, whether it's CIP or operating budget, that's not going to happen. We're not going to know from the state till 22 April, with their roughly $1 billion adjustment. So well, I can appreciate why some people say, how can we give away, or excuse me, not collect revenue due on cash transactions that take place? But guess what? Those people aren't going to collect hardly any meal taxes in March, April, and May and part of June, hardly at all. So therefore, those budgets will automatically be reduced for that reason. And I do want to have one question for the city attorney on these suggestions. Do any of these suggestions reach the threshold of 1% of the CIP being changed, or 1% of the operating budget of the city being changed to include, if we have to exercise, as Mr. Rouse identified, that item 4, which was the set aside reserve for a further lien on the contingency?
I would defer to Mr. Bradley, but I think the answer to that question is no.
Welcome back.
Thank you. So the answer to your question is no. 1%, I don't have the year one CIP in front of me, how much it is, but obviously 1% of the operating budget would be $20+ million, and 1% of the CIP, most of those cuts were not in that area. They were in the operating budget.
For themselves versus just my opinion. Thank you. And 1%, I think, of the CIP is $3 million. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Berlucci.
Well, good afternoon. I'm glad to be here with all of you for this discussion. And I would like to take a moment to affirm a point that was made by Councilmember Moss about the need to be very thoughtful about the discussion about the city budget and about the impacts that this crisis is having on our city budget, as well as the budgets of Virginia Beach families and businesses. Because frankly, many businesses and indeed many families and individuals, their budgets have been decimated by this crisis, and they're experiencing hardship, which is unprecedented in our lifetimes. And so as we consider discussions about reductions in expenditure and relief, I think it's really incumbent upon us as a matter of policy and as well as a matter of perception to be mindful of that fact and mindful about the fact, whether we like it or not, that this crisis is going to have an impact on our budget within the city of Virginia Beach and on the operations thereof. And frankly, I think to a large degree, it's tone deaf for us to consider an emphasis on liquidity and other best practices in ideal circumstances while our residents are suffering. However, it's also our responsibility, no doubt, to maintain that sense of responsibility and maintenance of the budget and operations. But there's been much, so I just wanted to make that point, but as well, there's been much discussion about furloughs and other reductions in the possibilities for reducing expenditures. And I would like to consider less austere measures that could equally be impactful. Obviously, a hiring freeze will have an impact. There could be reductions in purchasing, for example, vehicles and equipment and other things. Maybe it's possible that some purchases could be delayed for a year or more and maintained for longer than we had envisioned originally. Travel can be quite expensive, and professional development, those costs could be cut. In fact, I know many businesses and organizations are cutting those parts of their budgets in order to maintain savings and payroll, as well as a delay or reduction in renovations or expansions that can be quite expensive. So those are just a few areas for reductions that I think would be less austere and less problematic than furloughs or other things that would actually just contribute to the hardship that our economy and our families and businesses are facing. And I wonder if Mr. Leahy could comment on any of those or what the impacts of those, some of those items, in addition to the hiring freeze, such as purchases, travel, other staff expenses, or if there's any room to make a reduction in expenditures, for example, with some of the other things that I mentioned.
Well, we have, as we speak, a ban on travel, or at least a ban on any unnecessary or non-mission critical travel. We also have a ban on any training that is not required that someone is required or to maintain in order to for a certification for their job or their position, and we have a hiring freeze. As I indicated earlier, we'll know in May how well that has worked in April. I gave the directions in mid to late March, so I'm not able to tell you on a real-time basis how well they're working. We would imagine that they are producing some benefit, but I'll be able to report next month perhaps on what changes we've seen.
Councilmember Jones?
Well, it just seems to me that many of the concerns that Mr. Moss has expressed are valid, and I think all of us share those concerns. But the truth of the matter is that we're not ready to make any kind of a decision about reducing the personal property tax until we get a better feel from the city manager about how much we really need to cut. And I think from my conversations with Mr. Leahy, that he is working on that. I think that he will be diligent in bringing forth that kind of information to us. And I just don't want to lead the public to believe something's going to happen if it may not happen, if we can't afford for it to happen. And so with all of the concerns we have, and I think all of us are concerned that we are able to have a balanced budget by the end of this year, as well as have a balanced budget that we can vote on for the coming year. So I appreciate all of the concerns that have been expressed. I do believe that we have an opportunity to deal with the issue in an efficient way. And I'm sure Mr. Leahy will bring forward the opportunities for us to consider to create a balanced budget in the forthcoming year, as well as end this year balanced or close to balanced. And so I look forward to next week when he has the information for us that we can make a better and clearer decision as how we want to move forward. Thank you.
Councilmember Wilson?
I just briefly wanted to state that we're in unknown territory and don't really know what's going to happen. We've been very concerned about our businesses and our citizens. Looks like the federal government's going to be helping somewhat. But also in these times, what we don't know, we need to figure out is the demand of our services go up when people need us more. And we need to make sure that we have the ability to serve them and give them the things that they need during this really difficult time.
Any additional speakers or comments from council members? No additional comments, Mayor.
Okay, no additional guidance and preparation. I think we covered that. But I just want to thank all the council members, for participating and getting some ideas in. And in my discussions, with the city management and the team, is an incremental approach that we approach things short-term and deal with what we can right away. And then, we're just going to have to wait and see, as difficult as that is going to be over the next couple months, depending on the direction that this goes. We have to be proactive and reactive at the same time. But once again, we're going to get through this. We got some very bright people working on this, and we have a council dedicated to a good outcome. And for that, we're thankful. But, we have some work ahead of us. And, I appreciate the tenor of the conversation. Okay, at this...
Mayor, I'm sorry. Vice Mayor Wood has raised his virtual hand.
Okay.
I apologize. I thought I'd raised it earlier, but then I noticed it wasn't. I wanted to follow up on a couple of things that folks have said. I agree with a lot of what Mr. Moss has said, and a lot of with what Mr. Jones has said with respect to waiting for what the city manager is going to provide for us. I'd also like to say, in my opinion, and it's just mine, but I think that any sort of job actions, furloughs, layoffs, anything that you want to call it, should not be on the table right now. I think that's an absolute last ditch thing that we would consider. And the reason why is that I think that would just add additional problems for people that frankly need the employment. Our city employees are working very hard throughout this pandemic. It's a tough situation for everybody. They're working from home. They're working from remote locations. It's far from ideal or efficient, and I just think we need to be cognizant of that. But I also completely agree with what Mr. Jones said regarding the seeing the city manager's budget. Thank you.
That's all of the discussion, Mayor.
Okay, once again, thank you all.
I apologize. Councilmember Tower?
Thank you. I'd just like to make one request that to the extent we're exploring furloughing employees, I'd like to make a distinction between about the benefit side versus the salary side, so that we can have some information about what it would take in terms of actual layoffs versus furloughs. My understanding be that you could keep them on the benefit schedule, particularly health insurance, even if you stop their salaries. Just a request to staff, really.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think Mr. Bradley.
You want to? Sure. Go ahead, City Manager.
Councilman Tower, it is our understanding that we would be able to structure it such that if we furloughed employees, they would be in a leave with no pay status, but we would still be providing our benefits to them, such as the most important one being health care.
Other discussion?
Okay, once again, thank you all again. Okay, at this point, we'll move forward with the ordinances on our agenda. Ordinance number 1. Ordinance to suspend the provisions of the city code, penalties and interest upon certain local taxes during COVID-19 pandemic, sponsored by council members Moss and Tower. Okay, do we have a motion?
Councilmember Moss?
Now, I would move, but in listening to the conversations, I think 1 August is executable. This is on the deferral. I think it provides some breathing space. It is mimicked, after I said, after the Norfolk ordinance. Certainly Norfolk's in a less financially strong position than Virginia Beach. That's probably an understatement. And I think it's something that we can do, and I think it's something that we could weather. And it does express that we have some empathy. It allows people, number one, to maybe improve their cash flow, or at least to fully exercise these SBA loans that are out there that are not being delivered as fast as I'm sure the administration would have hoped. It also allows people, that wasn't the real purpose of it, to get their, those who have actual bank accounts, to get their economic personal stimulus check from the Treasury. And also for people who are unemployed, who were laid off or furloughed from their hotel or businesses, to get the maximum unemployment, if they so qualify, of $385, plus to get the additional $600 a week, some additional time to maybe put the money aside and make, or other sources of credit they might access, gives them more time to, so that that one-time payment on 5 June isn't as impactful as if we didn't provide relief.
That was a motion.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Councilmember Tower?
I second.
Do you have a motion?
Okay, I have a motion and a second. We're now open for council discussion.
Councilmember Tower, would you like to make a comment?
No, other than to Mr. Moss summarized my reasons for supporting the motion quite well. Thank you.
Mayor, I see no requests for comment or discussion.
Okay, at this point, let's open it for a vote.
Councilmember Abbott?
Aye.
Councilmember Berlucci?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Councilmember Tower?
Aye.
Councilmember Rouse?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood?
Aye.
Mayor Dyer?
Aye.
By a vote of 11-0, you have approved the ordinance to suspend provisions of the city code regarding penalties and interest upon certain local taxes during the COVID-19 pandemic, sponsored by Councilmembers Moss and Tower.
Thank you all very much. Moving on to the next ordinance, requested by Vice Mayor Wood, an ordinance to amend the city's continuity of government ordinance to set forth the manner and form of the budget hearings. Okay, do we have a motion?
Vice Mayor Wood?
Mr. Mayor, I move approval.
Have a second.
Councilmember Jones?
I second the motion.
Okay, we are open for council discussion.
Councilmember Moss?
I support the motion, as I sent an email back to Jim, but I want to make 2 comments. Number one, I would like to hope that we could create a, whether it's a chat room or a bulletin board or some other vehicle by which, as we put out a new budget here sometime in the near future, that we would continuously be able to receive chat comments and questions from the public on a continuous basis up until a week before we get the budget, so that council would have an opportunity to get those directly and see those and respond to them if they like. in light of the fact that we're going to be having an evolving budget process, which is also showing our agility and ability to adapt, but I think that would help. But I do want to point out one thing. While there is a state statute that requires that we adopt the school budget by 15 May, there is no statutory penalty for failing to comply. In fact, a number of jurisdictions have voted on their budgets for schools much after that. Not that should be a goal we should set, but I only mention it in that we may find ourselves, in light of what comes from the state budget, what we see happening and other updated information, we may find out that we are still trying to balance and find a way to get to the best budget possible. And we may not be able to meet the notice requirements or hearing that we would like to have from the public when we do that. So we have up actually until the end of May by the city's charter that states that should the city council not authorize a budget by the end of the month, meaning May 31st, that the manager's recommendation of record would then become the planning budget, but no money could be spent till we actually made an appropriation. I would just like us to, in our mind, think that let's not let the 15th of May, we talked about deliberation, 15th of May drive us to a bad decision if we haven't yet been able to work out all the implications. Another option that we have is we can authorize a budget, but then only appropriate a quarter of the budget because we're uncertain about future revenues. So I hope we're keeping all our toolbox that the council has open, and we're keeping open-minded that while the 15th is an important date, it is not a constraining date for which there is a penalty if we pass that date.
Any other council discussion? Mayor, it appears there's no further council discussion.
Okay, let's open it for the vote.
I'm sorry, Mr. Tower has raised his virtual hand.
Sorry for the late input. I'd just like to ask again staff to respond to Councilman Moss's comments about, not now, but in the course of the next week or so, in preparing their revised budget. I'd like for them to comment on the remarks that Mr. Moss just made about the authorizing things on a quarterly basis or less than a full year's basis. That's an intriguing concept to me and seems to me might be a wise thing to do, but I'd like to hear the staff's views on that at the appropriate time. Thanks.
Any further council discussion? Mayor, it appears as though council discussion.
Let's
no
call for the
further.
vote.
Councilmember Abbott,
Aye.
Councilmember Berlucci,
Aye.
Councilmember Henley,
Aye.
Councilmember Jones,
Aye.
Councilmember Moss,
Aye.
Councilmember Tower,
Aye.
Councilmember Rouse,
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson,
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood,
Aye.
Mayor Dyer.
Aye.
By a vote of 11-0, you have approved the ordinance to allow the budget public hearings to be conducted virtually, requested by Vice Mayor Wood.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to our third and final ordinance for consideration today. An ordinance to suspend meal tax for the months of May, June, and July, and to provide offsets for such tax suspension during the COVID-19 pandemic. Do we have a motion?
Vice Mayor Wood,
I believe Ms. Wilson had a motion.
sorry. Councilmember Wilson,
Yes. I would like to of May and June And we can make the adjustments. And I guess the finance department have to make the adjustments from the numbers that they have for 3 months. 2/3 of what everything is there. But anyway, to change the motion from May to June, and in June for us to reevaluate how well it's working, how well it's helping our businesses and our families. And then we can decide if we would like to extend it into July. So my motion is for the months of May and June.
Well, that's the primary motion at this point.
Okay, that's the primary motion, and that was to, change the dates and just make it for May and June. Is that correct? Council Lady Wilson?
Yes.
Okay, based on that, do we have a second?
Vice Mayor Wood,
Yes, I would second Ms. Wilson's motion.
At this point, we'll open it for council discussion.
Councilmember Berlucci,
Well, I certainly support the ordinance, and I appreciate Councilmember Wilson's recommendation that we make an adjustment to accommodate the months of May and June and reevaluate. I think that is a reasonable request and probably wise. But I do, before I consider voting in the affirmative on that ordinance as amended, that I would like to make a point that the restaurant business in particular has suffered incredible hardships through this crisis, and it's important for the city to be a partner for them through this crisis, and we should recognize that it may not be possible that restaurant. Well, let me put it this way: restaurants and their staff and those who are supported by that industry will still be recovering. And so I think it should be just top of mind that we keep that in mind when that reevaluation occurs. They'll still, even if we are open, which I hope we will be, those industries will be in tremendous recovery and will likely continue to need our support.
Councilmember Moss,
Yes, I'd like to pick up on Mike's remarks. When we get to June, I'm going to unplug. June, I hope in the interim, we can be talking to maybe some economic economists at ODU or other places to get a better appreciation for the elasticity of consumption with or without the meal tax, some insight as to whether or not just the psychological marketing value of extending it in July would help reinitiate human behavior that has gone dormant for about 3 months and get people back into thinking about going to restaurants and just seeing what that sensitivity is to the tax. We may find out at zero, but I would like to have that information when we go and assess into June, because I do believe it has been the industry that's been paying the biggest opportunity cost and survival cost. I just heard on a national radio show this morning, the average restaurant, not the average small business, but the average restaurant only has like 16 days cash on hand. So clearly many of these businesses have been closed or effectively closed for more than 16 days. And so the ones that do survive are certainly going to need to have the pump to the extent that we can help prime them to get them back up and running. So I very much identify with Mike's comments.
Councilmember Jones,
Thank you. At the early part of the meeting, we heard a presentation from our finance director. And we heard and Mr. Bradley, who were asked about, or made a comment at least, about the opinion of our financial consultants concerning our bond rating and so forth. And one of the comments that was made was that they did not advise us to take this action and that it could have cutting a tax at this point without further analysis of our budget and knowing where we stand, which is what we have tasked our city manager to do, would not be advisable. I am concerned that a preemptive act like this, prior to having the facts before us, to support doing this, could be detrimental to our financial standing in the eyes of our bond people, the people who we sell bonds to. And I do not support doing this, particularly at this time. I think we need to wait. I think we need to get more facts. We need to see where we stand. And I personally don't believe that foregoing this tax will have any impact at all on whether somebody goes out to buy takeout food from a restaurant. So I am not going to be able to support it.
Councilmember Henley?
Well, I agree completely with the things that Mr. Jones just said. I think the way we help the restaurants and all of our businesses is to get rid of this virus, to beat this virus so that they can reopen. And I know that we don't have the authority to require certain things, but we certainly have the ability to encourage our people to follow the guidelines and the mandates, and we have the ability to aggressively enforce those mandates that have been made. One that I hear an awful lot about are short-term rentals, inviting people to travel and to come here from other places in neighborhoods. I think we've certainly seen a lot of that citywide. We've seen it in a lot of neighborhoods that we didn't expect it. I think we have strongly suggested that these not be rented in residential neighborhoods at this time. And if they are, the people must follow the mandates. Stay at home, no more than 10, and all of those other things as well. I think there are things that we can do, and we should be doing as leaders to help get rid of this virus and to make sure that we can get Virginia Beach open again. Now, I'm understanding that this weekend, we're going to be receiving in our packet a totally redone budget, that our folks are working very hard to look at where we're going to have to make changes, cuts that we are going to have to make, and things that we're going to have to forego, at least for the interim, until we find out what the new normal is going to be. As we heard at the very beginning, there are just a lot of unknowns, and I don't think we can or should start taking actions incrementally until we know what the unknowns are and we know what we're dealing with. I think we're going to be losing our flexibility if we start this, and I just think this is the wrong step to take at this time. As I said, it's unstudied, and we need to have more facts at hand. I also just have to agree with Mr. Jones. I kind of think this action is just largely symbolic. I really don't believe it's going to have much value to our average citizen. As our staff has said, they're only projecting that we're going to have 25% of the usage of the meals anyway. And so our average citizen is not really going to realize much benefit. And I don't think it's going to have a significant effect on the restaurants and who is going to carry out or not. I think the significant thing that we can do is to beat the virus. And that's where I think we should have our emphasis now and make sure that Virginia Beach is open again.
Councilmember Abbott?
First of all, I want to thank Councilmember Wilson. I think your recommendation is great. I support the resolution in both forms, but I think watching it for 2 months and then reevaluating is not a bad plan at all. So I'm in support of that recommendation. I'd like to just add that the meals tax doesn't account for a lot of the cost of a takeout meal, but I think what we're seeing in the economy, and particularly for the average family and particularly for families of below average means, a couple bucks here and there does make a difference. And I think when we move into hopefully late June and July, reevaluating whether we do the meals tax might be an incentive for these small businesses to kind of jumpstart back in. So I do think that we need to be mindful of what the proactive benefits would be. But more than that, I don't think we're going to be we know we're anticipating a significant decrease in the taxes we're already going to be collecting. And I think we often say, you know, if we didn't have these restaurants, we wouldn't be collecting these taxes anyway. So I think anytime we have the opportunity to not collect a tax, we should try to take it. We know we're not going to be getting what we normally get to begin with. So I don't see an enormous risk in this. I'd also add many corporate industries are looking at givebacks to their consumers for the marketing advantage, and they're looking at small amounts as well. But the publicity that's gained from that and the good faith that's gained from that makes an enormous difference in the long run. So I understand the hesitancy of our advisors not wanting us to take risks that might adversely impact where we're going to be, but we already know that people are not eating out the way they used to eat out. So I think the risk here is nominal.
Councilmember Tower?
I'd just like to say how impressed I am by the arguments that have just been made, both for and against this. And I find myself, perhaps it's a mediator in me, wishing, I think we mediated ourselves to some degree by reducing the months to 2. I'm going to vote in favor of it largely because I think we live in an area where hospitality and tourism are important. The tourism business is pretty much completely gone. At least for the hospitality part of that, we can offer a little bit more encouragement that we're thinking about him and caring about him. I don't believe this is material either way. I think we can take another look at it in a couple of months. I'm very mindful of the keeping our good reputation in the financial community, and I don't believe that. But I'll express an opinion that has probably got about as much validity as an opinion as anyone else's, that I don't think the financial markets are going to pay a lot of attention to a suspension of meal tax for a couple of months in Virginia Beach. But I do appreciate all of the comments. I thought they were all very well taken. I think it's a close issue, but I'll vote in favor of it.
Vice Mayor Wood?
Well, thank you. I think what Ms. Kelly said when she came up there earlier was, I think she used the phrase, it was a double-edged sword when you evaluate these things. It's kind of a trade-off between, providing an incentive to small businesses and then also saving the tax revenues. And I think, kind of echoing what Mr. Tower said, I think Ms. Wilson's compromise, it provides the flexibility that they were talking about. And I kind of agree with him. I don't think that our suspension for 2 months of our meals tax is going to be a giant red flag for the Wall Street rating agencies. They might not look at it positively, but I don't think they're going to look at it negatively. And I think it provides, it's a small benefit. It's a 5% decrease on your restaurant bill for somebody, but that's still meaningful. And anything that we can do certainly to help our citizens who are stuck at home, and to help our small businesses that are truly suffering, I think we need to do. I think this is something that does not cause us irreparable financial harm, and it certainly provides an advantage to citizens of small businesses. So that's why I'm supporting it.
Councilmember Rouse.
Thank you. I heard good arguments on both sides of this ordinance. You know, you guys are getting the echo. Let me see something here. I don't know if this helps or not. Better. What this ordinance in this measure, I think what I'm reading, of course, and seeing is, I think we have to find ways to help out our small businesses, our restaurants. I can support this measure to suspend the meals tax, but I think it's important that we keep our even keel about us, and not be so restrictive, or restrict our ability to be flexible. When you look at certain parts of this ordinance where at the end of the year, we're gonna basically reserve the right for reversion funds for our schools. We already reserved that right anyway, but that's stated in this ordinance. When you look at $1,666 and $432 coming from human services. I mean, people are going to need human services more now than ever after coming after COVID-19, this pandemic. You look at our police department, and we're saying we're going to offset that by $1.6 million, and it goes on. One of the things I think is important for us to understand it is to kind of be more creative and adaptive in how we find the necessary offsets, other than some of these departments that have come up: human services, police department. What was the other one? In schools. And I think more now than ever, even when it comes to our schools, I think we all can appreciate how much our educators are not only feeding our children, but finding creative ways to interact with our kids. And trust me, they're going to be under immense stress as well to catch up when all of this is over. And so when I support the measure of helping out our restaurants and suspending meal tax, but we need to keep in mind also how this is going to affect us from a holistic standpoint. Some of our most vital services when it comes to the police, human services in our schools. With that being said, I end my comment.
Councilmember Moss.
I do think, I really like what Councilman Rouse had to say in terms of how we structure the budget. I have mentioned on many occasions that this formula approach and trust accounts and all these things really hem in the status quo. And while they sound attractive and politically expedient when we adopted them to satisfy certain special interest groups who want to have a lock on revenue, that when it comes time to like these, which may not be the last time we experience this, just think if this was a Category 3 hurricane, not only would we have people out of work, but the businesses wouldn't be in a position to even reopen. So, and the extent that we do that, we do reduce our flexibility, and then the staff comes back and plays our own policies to us. They don't tell us that, hey, you have the ability, if you want to go look at different trustee accounts, not enterprise funds, and take a different approach and move money around and take surplus money out of the CIP at certain places and really make bigger adjustments, because we create all these little stovepipes that we get recommended to by the staff and sometimes that we promote. And then when times like these, they lead us to bad solutions that we really would prefer not to have. So I hope one of the lessons that we take away from this particular item, and probably others, as we look at the budget, that we need to create the push more things in the unrestricted general fund, and everything has to compete every year for revenues based upon need and not because they have an entitlement to the taxpayers' money. And then when we have these types of things, we have a much broader way to provide offsets that are necessary without them being somewhat artificial because they really don't reflect the priorities of the council for the things that we are making reductions in. But in this sense, our past decisions have come home to roost, so to speak. So as we look at this next budget, let's not forget this experience and what was so distasteful about it. I liked all the other comments that were made with regards to the pros and cons. It is but it is a symbolic effort. But you know, in the governing republic that we are, symbolism is very important. It shows that the extent that government can be empathetic, that it is, that it's not tone deaf. Because tone deafness undermines public confidence. And to me, this is a demonstration symbolic, but definitely tells the public and tells those small businesses that we are not, as a city council, tone deaf to the impact of the COVID virus. And we're not in a position to materially influence, other than in a PR sense, the resolution of the virus itself, but we can change fiscal policy. That's something we do control.
Mayor, it appears that council discussion is over. No further discussion.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for their participation on this, and it's a tough situation that we have here, and probably one we're going to have over and over again over the ensuing months. But if I could just say, and if I can echo what Mr. Moss just said, you know, symbolism is going to be important, but also fiscal responsibility. And I think with this ordinance, it just proves that if we're going to take one reaction, there's going to be other reactions and trade-offs and things, and that's part of the decision process going forward. How much we have taken for granted, our lives have changed with this COVID virus. Things like going to the store, getting toilet paper, going out and sit and socialize in your favorite restaurant, getting together with friends for a dinner party at home. Our foundation has been rocked by this. And when we take a look, and we have to deal with, you know, certain priorities as they come up. And from what I've seen and a number of other people have seen, the restaurant industry has been terribly shaken. They're in a crisis situation right now. You know, it was only a couple weeks ago that 10 people were allowed to come to the restaurants, and they took a hit then. But then the restrictions are now that takeout and delivery only. And so many restaurants are trying to keep as many people employed as possible. They are in a crisis situation now that is really exacerbating by the day. So it was my recommendation that, you know, along with some other council folks, that we bring this forward at this time due to the immediacy of a response necessary. And, you know, some folks are going to survive this thing, and some folks, unfortunately, may not survive going forward. But I think we have to give every tool to an industry that we can, that would ensure as many people survive and thrive through this tough time. And once again, so when they're ready to open, they will be ready for business. So at this point, we can open the vote.
Sorry, Mayor. So I've had two council members raise their virtual hand for additional comments.
Okay.
Councilmember Wilson.
So sorry, I struggle with seeing whether my hand is up or not. It's such a small little thing on the screen. But wanted to say how much I appreciate everyone's comments. And I think everyone had a valid point, and no one was wrong here. It's just trying to decide which road to go down. And these are unprecedented times. And there's a lot of things that we can't do because we don't want to put the city in jeopardy, because we have to be there for our citizens. And that is our responsibility. But I think this is a temporary adjustment. This is a holiday. Be done temporarily. So I think it would be a big boost for our restaurants. I think But I would really like to see the city and the Restaurant Association to work together to promote this. And hopefully it can be a boost to encourage people to eat out more and, well, eat in more from their restaurants. And also bring recognition that these folks need all of us to be there for them, because these restaurants have been there for us. Look how many wonderful times we've spent with our friends and enjoyed the good food and camaraderie. And we're going to want those restaurants to open up again. And we need to do what we can to support them. And at the same time, it helps the families. And I think there's some people who are probably getting pretty tired of cooking. So I appreciate all the council members' comments. I see this as a meal tax holiday for just a brief amount of time. I wish we could start it tomorrow. But in the meantime, we can prepare and get our citizens ready to help support these restaurants like they've supported all of us. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Rouse.
I just want to reiterate, all the comments are, were coming from solid places, and I respect everyone's opinions and comments. I think this was a fruitful conversation. Just want to reiterate that in this times, though, we have to be completely, honest. Not that any other time. Just that all options have to be on the table. We have to be completely transparent about what options are available, and we have to make the two decisions. This is another, decision. There will be tougher ones coming down the line. Please believe me. But again, we have to, as leaders in our community, we have to make those tough decisions and make them early and make them. And we're going to have to make them often. And so, you know, again, I think it's important that we don't give a sense of false hope, that we shoot it straight. We be honest with the public. They understand the situation that we are all in. Everyone is sacrificing to make ends meet. So are we from a city standpoint. I think it's really it's vital and it's important that we place all our cards on the table and we shoot people straight about the decisions that we're going to make, that we're going to have to make, and what's in front of us. Thank you.
Councilmember Wooten.
Yes, thank you. I have to just say this. It's I want to express my gratitude to Councilmember Rouse, and I say Councilmember Rouse because he initially brought up the concern for our local businesses back in March when he brought forth a resolution to bring consideration to assist local businesses during this time. And I'd also like to thank Council Member John Moss and other colleagues who pushed for this special session because I, like many of you, received emails from constituents asking us to make sure we had this special session and to do something to help, to bring relief, to help our local businesses. And so we're here today because of the efforts of people that I mentioned and colleagues that pushed for this special session. And I thank the mayor as well for moving forward with this effort. And so the fact that we're here today is primarily and specifically to bring relief, to make decisions to help our citizens, to make decisions to support our local businesses. And this specific ordinance, while I don't, I have indifference when it comes to the impact that it will have on education and some of the other funds. I do have, I'm concerned about that. But on the other side, I'm also concerned about supporting our local businesses, supporting our residents to bring relief wherever we can to help them through this situation. And so for that reason, I consider both of those areas. But I believe the reason we're here outweighs my initial concern about addressing education in those other areas where it's going to impact for just a small period of time. And so for that reason, I would support this measure because the key perspective and the key reason is to bring relief and to support our local businesses during this time. Thank you.
Is there any further council discussion? I see no request for further discussion.
At this point, let's call for the vote.
Yes, sir. Councilmember Abbott?
Aye.
Councilmember Berlucci?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Nay.
Councilmember Jones?
Nay.
Councilmember Moss?
Aye.
Councilmember Tower?
Aye.
Councilmember Rouse?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson?
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten? She's said aye on the WebEx. Okay. Vice Mayor Wood?
Aye.
Mayor Dyer? By a vote of 9-2, you have adopted the amended ordinance to suspend mills tax for the month of May and June.
Okay, I want to thank the city council members participating, the staff participating, and all the hard work of so many people and so many people working hard in our city. We are on a journey together that we must make together, and together we must provide some very positive outcomes. And just remember, we are one day closer to having this situation over than we were yesterday. Thank you all. We are adjourned.